So, ladies and gentlemen, I stand before you, a liberated man. I have done it. I have achieved the impossible feat. I have spent 10 days in the wilderness without an iPhone, without an iPad, without any internet connection whatsoever, without any reading materials, without any writing materials, and I have not spoken a word during that entire 10 days except for the occasional 4 or 5, strictly for benefit of a little bit of clarification from a meditation teacher in the process. But otherwise, absolute, total silence. And you thought I couldn't do it. I heard you laughed at that possibility. Oh, ye of little faith. Now fork up the money here because I did it. Next week I'm going to tell you about the actual experience. Okay? And it was a fascinating one for me. It was profound in ways that I couldn't begin to imagine. But this week, as a little bit of a prelude to that actual description of what took place in this 10-day silent retreat, I thought I'd give you a little bit of a heads up as to why I chose to do this in the first place. Because some of you were asking me before I went, and you were saying to one another, you gotta be crazy. Like this is a ludicrous thing to do. You said, 10 days of silence, why do you want to do that? It seems like it'd be totally boring. And you've also said, some of you have said, I'd go crazy in that kind of situation. So why do it? So I've been on the tail of chasing, it's like a dog chasing its tail. I've been chasing this silence thing all my life, basically. But I thought it was high time to really try and grab hold of that tail finally. But here's a little bit of kind of the theoretical part of why it's important to chase after silence in our lives. How many of you would like to spend a weekend with Donald Trump in a hotel room? Yeah, but then you always were a bit nuts. Donald Trump in a hotel room. Even so, Drew, this is for you. How many of you would like to live inside Donald Trump's brain and not be able to get out? He may be smart in some ways. I'm not denying it. But all that bombast, all that negativity, all that fear. A lot of commentators have said that really deep down there's this little boy who feels desperately wants to be liked and loved. I, for one, wouldn't want to live inside that brain. But we're kind of fascinated by it, aren't we? And we're fascinated with what comes out of it because that kind of craziness that we see is associated with the person on the planet with the most power and most influence of anyone in the world. And they've got this kind of brain. And you see what's going on, and there's something really kind of wacko here. What we don't see, and what's often so tragic, is that we don't see normally on our everyday lives what goes on inside of the brains of other seemingly normal, healthy human beings like that young shooter in Quebec last week, who to everybody on the outside world seemed like he was a university student, doing okay in school. He was kind of a quiet, introverted kid, but had never shown any signs of real abnormality. And then one day, he walks into a mosque, into a church, and just decides to kill a whole bunch of people. What's going on in that kind of a brain? Right? There's a Buddhist teacher who once said, we very often designate and incarcerate and name people who are mentally ill. We put them into psychiatric institutions to get help. But this Buddhist teacher said, in actual fact, the truth is that we are all, the entire human race, is mentally ill. The entire human race participates in all sorts of deranged and unhealthy and fundamentally messed up thinking and emoting and behavior. And when the Buddhist teacher said that, I said, oh, of course, that doesn't include me. But it does. It does include me. It includes each and every one of us here today. Think about your own cognitive patterning throughout your life, right? Think about your own thoughts for a second. How healthy are your thoughts all the time? How healthy are your emotional states all the time? I've often thought, sometimes people who are on a spiritual journey think, and people who are on a psychic awareness journey think, I'd love to be able to develop telepathic ability. I'd love to be able to know what's going on in other people's minds and thoughts. And I swear to you, this day there wouldn't be a single relationship survive if we knew what was always going on inside each other's brains, and we always knew what was going on inside of each other's thoughts and emotional states. How much fear do we experience in our own lives? All those feelings of self-esteem and lack of self-esteem and anger and jealousy and frustration and all the thoughts that go along with them, all the negativity that goes on in our own brains. We are all, according to this Buddhist teacher, to a certain degree, mentally ill. Donald Trump is just a very, very public, high-profile example of this. And maybe a somewhat more extreme example of this. But we all participate in that. So going on retreat, going into a meditation retreat in particular, is an endeavor, first and foremost, to develop self-awareness and self-wisdom about the extent and depth of our own mental derangement. Okay? It's to become aware of all that cognition, all that thinking and feeling that's often been with us from childhood. That is unhealthy, that is negative, that is dark, that is not where we are called to be as human beings. Because becoming aware of all of that, first and foremost, is the step to wisdom and to wholeness. So I've been doing that for many years in my meditation. But there's one thing to become aware of it, and there's a whole other thing to learn how to release it, to let it go, to move beyond all of that. And there was a number of times, and I'll probably say this again next week, there were a number of times in this 10-day retreat when I thought, I am in a major detox center here. Okay. It was partly detox with regards to food and sweets and that sort of thing, right? But, you know, we think of detox centers as just being for the really heavy-duty stuff, but it's a kind of a detoxification of our own minds and our own thinking and our own patterning, right? And so meditation is a process of learning to become aware of what's going on in our brains and then learning to release it, flush it, let it go, not hang on to it. And I'll talk about the technique that we used next week. If you can move deeply into that meditative process, and one of the things that the place I went to, they screen you before coming, because anyone who has any really serious mental health issues needs to get some other kinds of help before going into this kind of environment, right? So they want to make sure you're already what society claims is a relatively healthy and normal, balanced human being, right? But so that you can move into an even deeper level of that, right? Because if you've got all sorts of really entrenched stuff, it's hard to go into this space. So meditation is a process of learning to see all those patterns, all that crud. Well, it's the good stuff, but all of that crud that goes on inside our psyches, and then it's a learning to let it wash out, to let it release, to let it. And what happens when the meditative process is profound and deep is that you do. You enter into a space and a place where all of that stuff indeed starts to settle. You know, it's like in a pond that's all churned up and all the crap is at the bottom of the pond. And when you start to become still, when the winds stop blowing, then all the crud starts to sink to the bottom of the pond, and the water becomes very profoundly still. And that does happen. And I'm here to tell you that I had the most profound experience of that ever in my life in this last 10 days. And when that happens, there is a deep wisdom that emerges out of the depths of the water. And the wisdom that emerges out of the depths of the water, there's much wisdom and much wisdom that is idiosyncratic to the individual experience. But when you look at it universally, the wisdom that emerges is, first and foremost, you recognize how restless, how profoundly restless and unsettled we all are all the time. And you recognize that unsettledness and restlessness emerges from a couple of things that are constant dynamics in our human psyches. There's something about our human psyche that is constantly craving. You remember that song by Katie Lang? Thank you. Constant craving. Thank you, Rick. I love Katie Lang. There's a constant craving in our beings. It's sensation. We see stuff and we always want more. We're never, never, never satisfied. And if it's good, we always want more of the good. And if it's bad, there's a constant aversion. So negative, difficult, challenging, grief-filled, whatever it is, experiences in our lives, you recognize how there's a resistance to all of that. We're constantly fighting it, trying to get rid of it. this craving, this aversion, this restlessness constantly drives us into activity in the world, some of which is healthy, perhaps, but much of which is unhealthy. Can you just imagine that young shooter's brain in Quebec? What would lead a university student, a sensible young man like that, good upbringing, good family, all of that, what would lead him to go out and do something like that? There's a kind of a crazy churning, with my Scrabble game or the scrambled eggs example. It's like all that thinking is just rah! And it leads to really nutso actions, horrible actions. And the other deep insight that emerges out of still water is that all of that stuff that's churning in our brains and our emotions and our psyches all the time, it arises, it goes, it's always changing. And you recognize there's nothing permanent about it. There's nothing stable or solid about it. It's just this noise. It's constantly going on inside of us. And you recognize that that's not me. That's just something that's going on inside of me, but it's not me. But we identify with the noise all the time. Are you aware of that? We identify with the noise. We identify with the negative, angry thoughts or whatever the thoughts are, or the emotional states or whatever they are. We identify. That's me. I'm or I'm or whatever. But it's not. There's something much deeper to who we are. And that's the level of spirit or soul or what have you. That is who we really are. Jesus, throughout his ministry, Scripture tells us, constantly went off into the wilderness to be by himself, to pray, to establish stillness, sure of it, to reground, to regain perspective on life. Because the world is constantly full of all that craziness. It's the collective craziness of what's going on in the collective minds of everybody. And Jesus had to deal with that in a huge way. Like he lived in a pretty, you think our society is nuts. Well, the society Jesus was in was destructive and weird in all sorts of ways. And when you come to that clear, peaceful place where the water is still inside of you, what happens is you gain a perspective on the world. You see how nuts it is. You truly do. You see how the whole world is kind of this crazy turmoil all the time. There are good dimensions to it. There's good stuff that's emerging all the time, but there's a lot of just all this stuff going on in the States right now. It's turmoil. It's all this noise and craziness and confusion. And we think, oh, it was just politics and da-da-da-da-da-da. But it really, when you look at it from up here, you just see like, so that's why it's really important. It's really important for us to develop some self-wisdom, to develop some peace. Jesus goes into the wilderness to develop that peace that passes all understanding. Because until we bring that kind of peace into our individual lives and hearts and beings, it has to start here. It starts here, and then it needs to move out to change institutional structures and to bring it into the world. But it at least has to start here. There are deeper, profoundly spiritual insights also in terms of the connection. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this next week. The connection between mind and body, for instance, that emerge out of all of this too. and deeper kinds of spiritual insights that come out of that clarity as well. And we'll get into that next week. But for now, let me just say, so if some of you say to me, David, when I've encouraged you, and I've encouraged some of you to do this, right? I said, let's go do a 10-day retreat. Maybe we'll do one at BU&C for all of us. Go do a 10-day retreat, and you say to me, David, I'd go crazy on a 10-day retreat. You better not say that, because I'll just respond to you with a little twinkle in my eye and a little bit of compassion in my heart. It's because you already are crazy. You're already crazy. So go and find out about how crazy you really are. I discovered on a scale of 1 to 10, well, I'm not too crazy, but I got my crazy corners. I got my dark corners. I got my weird places. Learning about them is the beginning of wisdom, to letting them go and to beginning to enter into that peace and that place, that peace that passes all understanding that Jesus talks about and that he says God wants for us all. For the human race to truly evolve into a healthy, loving, the kind of place God intends for our human lives, we all need to learn to cultivate that deeper peace. And you don't necessarily have to do it on a 10-day retreat, right? I said on the blog posting, and I think some of you saw that, I said, if you've ever walked, you've taken a bit of time off in the summer or whenever, and you walk the beach, or you're, in the morning or the evening, and you see the sun coming up over the water, or you're just having a good walk in the woods, or you take any moments in your lives that are a bit of a time-out moment, right? You all know a bit of the experience of, you all know a bit of the experience of gaining perspective. And you all know how important that is, how profoundly important that is for us as individuals and for the human race. I think I'm going to do, I'm not sure how my honey feels about it. I put her on notice. I'm going to do this. This is going to become an annual event for me. It's going to become an annual event for me. Next time Drew, I'll invite you along and we'll go together, okay? Namaste.
So today I invite you to join me in a prayer of thanks for silence. In our privileged silence today, we find the absence of the cries of a hungry child. And in our privileged silence today, we notice there are no sirens or warnings we have to fear. In our privileged silence today, we can stop and recognize the beauty of this unsurrendered Mi'kmaq territory. In our privileged silence today, we have the space to ponder ways to share our gifts with the world and to find the energy to move into action when we leave here today. In this prayer, we recognize both the privilege afforded to us and the true gift of silence, where your love is felt, Lord, and your message is received. May we always hear your message of love and find your gifts of courage and strength in moments of silence. Amen.
Let us go out singing, which is a good way to spread peace and joy. Our closing hymn is Though Ancient Walls. Let's rise as we are able.
Still
So take this light with you into the week and find strength in silence and Christ in every breath.
We're going to have some fun going out singing in harmony, all of us, to model a little unity and harmony, right? So if you are more close to this side, sort of from Krista over, you're group 1. You're singing with these 4 lads. That's your group. You guys should shove over a little bit so they know that's my group. If you're singing from the middle over to the middle here, you're group 2, singing with these folks and Jocelyn. And if you're from here to the middle, thank God you sit near the ends of the aisles, right? You are group 3 with these 4. And if you are from the middle over here, you are with group 4, which are over here. And we'll sing the benediction through twice. We'll see it on the screen at this time, Johnny boy. Next. There we go. Go. It sounds like this. We'll sing it through twice. This is a round, I should say that. And then I'll bring in group 1, group 2, group 3, group 4, and there'll be this beautiful harmony all through the church, which will go out into the world. When in doubt, just sing whatever you want. Sounds like this. Go now in peace, go now in peace. May the love of